Hello YouTube, this is When who does research for fun. In this video, I would like to go over my first authored paper titled UAV-based heating requirement determination for frost management in apple orchard, which was published in the journal Remote Sensing in 2021. When I was enrolled in my PhD program, my advisor Dr. Dana Choi already had an awarded CPS medium grant from the National Science Foundation, which proposed a cyber-physical system consisting of a UAV-assisted machine vision system for high spatial temporal resolution monitoring of flower developmental stages and field temperatures in orchards, and a self-navigating ground vehicle to proactively apply heat in orchards based on an adaptive control strategy to obtain optimal frost protection, accounting for variable tree canopy sizes and temperatures, with the two subsystems integrated through wireless communication. The project proposal in terms of its research value was novel and excellent, since at the time, precise frost management in agriculture was a complete white space, and I was honored to be the very first researcher in history to touch on this topic and publish a paper about it. Given the massive scope of the project, multiple research labs, professors, and grad students were involved, and my responsibility was the UAV-based sensing part. Of course, from the general ideation of the proposal to detailed implementation and execution of the study, I still had to come up with actual solutions and experimental designs to fill the gaps. At that point, I worked very, very hard. Absolutely had no life outside of academia type hard. And I delivered my portion of the project in just about a year, which comprised the bulk of my dissertation. Now let's dive into the paper. Frost is a common natural phenomenon and can be classified in different ways. By appearance, there are white frost and black frost. Dew point is the temperature to which air must be cooled for water vapor to condense into liquid water. When air temperature is below dew point but above freezing, implying dew point is also above freezing, dew forms. When air temperature is below dew point and also below freezing, visible white frost forms. When air temperature is below freezing but above dew point, implying dew point is also below freezing, invisible black frost forms. By formation process, there are radiation frost and advection frost. Radiation frost occurs on clear, calm nights when surfaces cool rapidly by radiating heat to the sky, while advection frost develops when a mass of cold air invades an area by wind, both of which lower temperatures below freezing. Frost commonly occurs during early spring and late fall, and it damages crops through freeze-induced dehydration and mechanical disruption of cell membranes caused by ice crystals. In US, frost has caused more economic losses to agriculture than any other weather-related phenomenon, and often devastates local economies. As an example, this map here shows the freezing damage sustained by vineyards in the Lake Erie region in 2012. The degree of frost damage is dependent on many factors including rate of temperature drop, cloud and wind conditions, frosting duration, and crop growth stage. Generally speaking, certain crop developmental stages are more vulnerable to coldness, such as flowering or grain filling. For fruit trees, fruit quality can be greatly influenced by just light frost. For example, during apple blossoming periods, temperatures that are a few degrees below freezing point are adequate to harm or kill flower buds, and injured blossoms typically do not develop into fruits. Frost damage in orchards can be avoided or minimized by different types of protection methods. Examples of passive methods include site and plant selection, or selecting less frost-susceptible locations and cold-resistant crop varieties, cold air drainage, or planting sensitive crops on slopes or elevated areas to let cold air flow away from them, soil and plant covers, or applying straw, compost, mulch, plastic or fabric covers to trap heat in the soil and plants, etc. They are typically less costly than active methods, yet often insufficient to protect crops under severe frost conditions. Active methods can be implemented right before or during a frost event to prevent the formation of ice within plant cells. There are a few types of common equipment. The first one is wind machines, which work by breaking the inversion layer in the atmosphere formed during radiation frost events and bringing warm air down to ground level, therefore preventing thermal stratification. They typically have low operational cost, yet they do not work under cold, windy conditions. The second one is sprinklers, which work by utilizing water's latent heat released during freezing or heat of solidification to keep plant tissues at around 0 degrees Celsius. However, they have high installation cost, consume large amounts of water, and can cause broken branches due to ice overloading. The third one is heaters, which directly adds heat to air and warms up plants through advection and radiation. Directly adding heat to air has the potential to replace substantial energy losses during frost events. However, a single heater cannot cover a large area, and fuel consumption and CO2 emission are some of the additional downsides. For temperature monitoring methods, dry bulb temperature is needed for methods such as wind machines and heaters, which is usually measured by orchard thermometers placed inside weather instrument shelters. And wet bulb temperature is needed for methods such as sprinklers, because growers need to make sure that the sprinklers are turned on or off when the wet bulb temperature is above plant critical damage temperature to prevent initial evaporative cooling damage and maximum frost protection efficacy. And it can be measured using psychrometers or lookup tables based on dry bulb temperature and dew point. Unfortunately, traditional orchard temperature monitoring based on orchard thermometers has a few noteworthy shortcomings. First, the amount of thermometers being used in an orchard is a limiting factor for how precise the orchard temperature can be managed spatially. Imagine in an apple orchard, if we only place 3 orchard thermometers in it, then at most, we can divide the orchard into 3 regions for independent temperature management. However, if there is a cold spot somewhere in the orchard that is away from and not being detected by the thermometers, then frost damage can occur at the cold spot without us even realizing it. Second, growers have to manually check the thermometer readings, which can be laborious and untimely in large orchards. Third, plant tissue temperature may differ from air temperature. Thermometer readings do not necessarily reflect true orchard frost treatment demands. Lastly, spatial plant growth stage variation in an orchard is typically ignored during frost protection. It can be wasteful to maintain the same temperature throughout an orchard, as plant sensitivity to cold damage and critical temperatures can vary with plant developmental stages. UAVs or drones are one of the fastest developing research topics in precision agriculture, and potentially, missions such as plant growth stage classification and plant temperature monitoring could be efficiently accomplished by UAV-based sensors such as cameras. Aerial thermal cameras are able to measure temperature or heat through infrared radiation, and they have been applied in research for a wide range of crops such as citrus, grape, almond, maize, soybean, and sugar beet. The measured canopy temperature information is typically used for crop water status assessment, since it is a function of available soil water and plant transpiration rate. Additionally, it has been reported in literature that canopy temperature correlates with various crop traits such as lodging, biomass, yield, etc. To monitor large orchard temperature and cover a large area in a single frame, a high UAV flight altitude can be required due to the limited field of view of thermal cameras, which results in decreased image spatial resolution, since each pixel now covers a larger area. One of the ways to overcome this issue is to stitch multiple overlapping, high spatial resolution images into one mosaic using well-established image stitching techniques. On the other hand, RGB cameras play a crucial role in remote sensing, since images in the visible spectrum represent agricultural objects and environments very well, making them ideal for identifying crop reproductive organs at different growth stages. A common RGB image analysis topic is object detection, which deals with the localization and classification of target objects in images. And typically convolutional neural network-based algorithms, also known as object detectors, are used to address this problem, such as the popular RCNN series and YOLO series. Object detectors have been successfully applied in the agriculture domain for plant growth stage classification. Some examples include detection of grape shoots, flower buds, pedicels, and berries, identification of strawberry flowers, and immature and mature fruits, classification of mango panicle stages, distinction of olive open and non-open flowers, classification of mountain aven buds, flowers, wilted flowers, and seed pods, and counting of wildflower buds, flowers, and fruits. There were a few motivations behind the study. First, a modernized methodology of heating requirement determination for frost management in orchards that can assess localized actual heating needs while considering spatial plant growth stage variability and minimizing human involvement was missing in literature and would be desirable. Second, thermal image stitching was a less popular topic than RGB image stitching and deserves further study. Third, deep learning-based plant developmental stage classification in general was an underexplored topic, as the difficulty of object detection tasks can vary greatly for different plants and environments depending on factors such as scene disorderliness, object positioning, and object occlusion, which remains unknown for many species such as apple. The goal of the study was to demonstrate the concept of UAV-based apple orchard heating requirement determination for frost protection in a high-resolution, low-time cost fashion. Specifically, the objectives of the study included: first, develop a georeferenced orchard temperature mapping algorithm based on thermal image stitching. Second, build a CNN-based classifier for apple flower bud growth stages and implementing the classifier to create orchard flower bud growth stage maps. And third, simulate orchard heating requirement maps in terms of how many degrees tree temperatures must go up for flower buds to not have damages during frost events based on the aforementioned maps. The field experiments were conducted at the Russell E. Larson Agricultural Research Center of Penn State, which is located in Pennsylvania Furnace. More specifically, Block CW1 of the apple orchard there was utilized for the study, and this is where I spent a significant portion of my life for 3 years straight. The orchard was roughly 25 meters long and 15 meters wide. It was originally planted in 2008 and consisted of 4 rows and 2 cultivars, including Jonah Gold and Daybreak Fuji, with 16 trees in each row and 2 rows for each cultivar. Tree spacing inside each row was about 1.7 meters, and row spacing was about 4 meters. The trees were mechanically pruned into hedgerow, and the average tree height was around 2.7 meters. We had a few considerations in mind when selecting the appropriate hardware for the study. For UAV, it needed to have a high payload to carry heavy instruments such as cameras while maintaining a reasonable hovering time. For thermal camera, it must be radiometric so that it can measure absolute temperature. High thermal image resolution can also help create detailed orchard temperature maps. For RGB camera, it should have an exceptional zooming capability to capture high-definition images of small apple flower buds, as UAV must fly above a certain altitude to not cause turbulence near trees and prevent apple flower buds from being blurry in images. Our final equipment selections included Matrice 600 Pro, Zenmuse Z30, and Zenmuse XT2 from DJI, and this table here shows the key specs of the equipment. There are a few different types of data collected for the study. For thermal camera, this picture shows its flight mission path. Datasets used for demonstration were collected on June 2, 2020. The flight altitude was set at 20 meters above ground level to mitigate parallax error, and the UAV flew at 1 meter per second, while the thermal camera captured images every 2 seconds with a 90-degree pitch. Approximately 100 thermal images were captured and saved in TIFF format in 4 minutes during each fully autonomous flight, and the images had a 75% front overlap and a 70% side overlap. For RGB camera, this picture shows its flight mission path. The dataset covering different apple flower bud growth stages were captured on the 19th, 23rd, and 28th of April, and the 2nd, 7th, 13th, 16th, and 21st of May in 2020, and later on the 24th of September 2020. Some negative samples containing no apple flower buds were also collected for model training. Additionally, the paper did not mention that we also collected RGB images on the 13th and 24th of April and the 1st and 7th of May in 2021 to verify model performance across different years. And of course, that dataset was captured after the paper has already been published. The RGB images were captured with the camera's full optical zooming capability, a fixed focus to tree canopy top, and a 90-degree camera pitch. Except for the first data collection date when a 10-meter above ground level flight altitude was adopted. The UAV flew at 15 meters above ground level, with a manual speed no higher than 0.1 meters per second to ensure image sharpness. A semi-autonomous RGB mission required 40 to 90 minutes to complete, when 600 to 1100 images in JPEG format were captured, and the UAV's flying altitudes were maintained automatically by DJI's A3 Pro flight control system. Something the paper did not cover was the LiDAR portion of the study, which was essential for generating the final actionable map with georeferenced tree row boundaries to guide ground heating vehicle navigation, so that it would not run into any trees. I will discuss the UAV LiDAR system in detail in my next video, since I published another paper for it. For now, all we need to know is that there was a LiDAR installed on the UAV. The LiDAR was configured with a 90-degree horizontal field of view. The UAV flew at 20 meters above ground level at 1 meter per second, and each flight only took about 1 minute to complete. Since the LiDAR was able to scan 4 apple tree rows simultaneously, the flight path for the LiDAR missions was just a single pass. Before using thermal camera to measure temperatures, it needs to first go through radiometric calibration to improve its measurement accuracy. The reason for that is because thermal camera readings can be affected by different factors. The first one is object emissivity. Objects with different emissivities can appear to have different temperatures, even if their actual temperatures are the same. Therefore, to calibrate for a specific object, the calibration target must have a similar emissivity. At the time, the emissivity of our actual targets, apple flower buds, were not clearly documented in literature, but typical green leaves such as apple leaves have been reported to have an emissivity of 0.95. Therefore, it was used as a reference. Pure water, on the other hand, has an emissivity of 0.97 to 0.99 in the spectral range of 8 to 13 micrometers, with observing zenith angle in between 0 to 30 degrees, therefore could serve as the calibration target. I will discuss object emissivity further in a future video since I have another paper about this topic. The second factor is flight altitude. However, under low flight altitude changes, which was the case of the study, atmosphere-induced radiometric distortion can be considered negligible. We eventually used a plastic container with tap water as the calibration target, and we used ice and an immersion water heater to change the water temperature. At each temperature, we measured water temperature using a digital thermometer as ground truth. The thermometer was made by Thomas Scientific and had an accuracy of ±0.2 degrees Celsius. The thermometer readings were only recorded when they were stabilized. Meanwhile, thermal images of the plastic container were also captured at a 20 meter above ground level altitude with a 90-degree camera pitch to simulate thermal flight missions. These two images show how the water container looked like in the thermal images at 10 degrees Celsius and 75 degrees Celsius water temperatures respectively. In total, 40 pairs of thermometer readings and thermal images were collected. Then for each thermal image, non-water pixels were first cropped out, and the average pixel value of the water pixels were calculated. Each image had about 200 water pixels. Finally, The relationship between pixel intensity and water temperature was estimated using robust least squares regression with bi-square weights. Thermal images are generally more challenging to register than RGB images due to their lower resolution and fewer image details. In the study, we adopted a feature-based approach for the thermal image stitching algorithm. More specifically, the BRISC feature detector and descriptor were chosen. BRISC detector identifies image key points through the fast detector on octaves and an image pyramid, and a non-maxima suppression by comparing a point of interest to its neighboring points on the same octave, as well as corresponding points on the neighboring octaves. BRISC descriptor describes a circular sampling area of a key point in a binary manner with scale and rotation normalized. The thermal image stitching algorithm was developed in Python based on the OpenCV and scikit image libraries. The workflow of the algorithm consisted of the following steps. It is going to be a little technical here, but bear with me. In a moment, I'll have some pictures that will make the workflow a little easier to understand. For any pairs of images taken consecutively, the BRISC key points and descriptors of the two images were computed. Pairwise Hamming distances between the descriptors from the two images were calculated exhaustively, and each query descriptor was considered to have a match when the distance ratio between the closest and the second closest neighbors is smaller than 0.8, as suggested by Dr. David G. Low. In case you don't know, Dr. Low was the one who proposed the legendary SIFT image feature. The transformation between two image planes was assumed to be 2D Euclidean, considering the images were taken with constant UAV flight altitude and camera pitch. All pairwise homographies were estimated through RANSAC within 100 iterations, where each random data subset contained 4 pairs of key point matches, which is the minimum amount, and the maximum distance for a key point to be classified as an inlier during reprojection was set as 2 pixels. Anchor homographies, which allow all the images to be registered to the same anchor image, were calculated by pairwise homography multiplication. Image stitching was achieved by warping non-anchor images based on their anchor homographies and overlaying them to the anchor image. And the intensities of all overlapping pixels were averaged in the stitched mosaic. Here is a pair of thermal images captured consecutively over the apple orchard. First, we run the BRISC detector to identify potential key points. Then we try to match the key points between the two images based on their descriptor Hamming distances. But there will be lots of mismatched pairs. Then we use RANSAC to iteratively estimate homography for 100 times. By randomly choosing 4 pairs of key point matches, calculate homography based on that, apply the homography onto the key points from the source image, and then compare the transformed source image key points to the destination image key points. If their location difference is within 2 pixels as shown on the picture, they are considered as an inlier pair. The final homography is the one with the most inlier key point matches. Once we have that, we can warp the source image accordingly and finally overlay it on top of the destination image to achieve image stitching. And this is what it looked like when a pair of thermal images were stitched. To georeference the thermal mosaic, we cannot use the typical black and white ground control points, as they do not necessarily show temperature variations within the board well, and therefore won't always be very noticeable in the thermal images. Instead, we used 3 plastic saucers filled with room temperature water as ground control points, since they appear as circles with relatively uniform pixel intensities in the thermal images, hence were easy to detect. The saucer diameters varied from 0.46 to 0.63 meters, and the size difference allowed them to be later identified uniquely during image processing. The saucers were placed around the orchard edge, and their center GNSS coordinates were measured by a pair of reach modules from MLID with a TW4721 single-band antennas from Talisman Wireless. As the outputs of the GNSS module always carry a certain level of noises, to achieve better location estimations, for each saucer, 900 to 1000 latitude and longitude readings of the saucer center were recorded at a 5 Hz update rate, and the median values were taken as the saucer center coordinates to avoid potential outliers. Our tests showed that the saucer GNSS measurements attained an accuracy of ±0.13 meters. The 2-to-1 Huff transformation was implemented in Python as the method for saucer detection, which basically searches for circles in images. During georeferencing, the pre-measured GNSS coordinates were assigned to the center pixels of the detected saucers. To convert the rows and columns of raster thermal mosaics into latitude and longitude coordinate maps, least squares fitting based first-order polynomial transformation was utilized. Before we can discuss classifying apple flower bud growth stages, first we need to establish the growth stages. Traditionally, apple flower buds are considered to have 9 growth stages, including silver tip, green tip, half-inch green, tight cluster, first pink, first bloom, full bloom, and petal fall. As growth stage transition is a gradual process, we observed that it could be very difficult to distinguish certain growth stages in the RGB images. This actually marks one of the most challenging aspects of agricultural classification tasks, and that is the classification of plants lacking class-defining characteristics due to their gradual transition nature. Imagine a female face and a male face. It is easy for us to say which one is female and which one is male. But what if we generate a bunch of transitional faces in between? At which point we start calling a face female or male. And that is exactly what happens in agriculture all the time. Unfortunately, since I am a seasoned reviewer and I have reviewed hundreds of manuscripts, most agricultural researchers, when dealing with the classification tasks, they usually only consider and use data of plants when they have clear growth stage defining characteristics, but neglect the scenarios where plants are transitioning from one stage to another. To simplify the classification problem, since the neighboring stages have either identical or close critical temperatures, we created a 6-class system for the apple flower bud classification that merged certain growth stages as shown in this table. Considering the critical temperatures of Jonah Gold and Daybreak Fuji remained unknown in current literature at the time, we adopted Red Delicious critical temperatures for both apple varieties as a reference. However, aside from growth stage, plant variety also has an influence on plant cold tolerance. Therefore, vegetation heterogeneity should also be considered for the most precise orchard temperature management. Before we move further, for clarification purpose, in the following slides, bud refers to the complete structure of what a flower tip develops into, such as a flower cluster with several flowers and numerous leaves. A flower refers to an unbloomed pink flower in pink stage, a bloomed white flower in bloom stage, or a petalless flower in petal fall stage. Typically, CNN-based models rely on supervised learning, meaning ground truth needs to be prepared manually by experts, such as annotations of target objects in an image. However, there were several factors that posed challenges to the image annotation process for this study. First, as discussed previously, the development of apple flower buds occurs in a gradual manner, and buds oftentimes do not possess enough distinct characteristics to be classified in a certain growth stage, which adds difficulties to the decision-making during annotation. Second, because of the training systems adopted for the orchard, apple trees could have a dense 3D distribution of buds and flowers that grow closely to each other, which creates confusing scenes for humans to identify a complete flower bud in 2D images. Third, vegetative buds can be mistaken as flower buds, especially for the ones before tight cluster stage. Fourth, an apple flower bud grows from a tiny tip into a flower cluster containing multiple flowers and leaves, which involves a significant size change. Identifying flowers and leaves that belong to the same bud could be demanding and impractical. Last, as the RGB images were taken by a UAV observing a small area, any slight tree or UAV movements during data collection could lead to reduced image quality. To address the annotation challenges, we determined the following criteria as an annotation guideline for the bud annotation process. For stages at or before tight cluster, include the whole bud in a bounding box. For stages at or after pink, exclude leaves from a bounding box. For stages at or before tight cluster, each bounding box should contain only one bud. For pink or petal stage, if the flowers that belong to the same bud are recognizable and relatively close to each other, label all flowers in the same bounding box. Otherwise, label each flower with a bounding box. For bloom stage, each bounding box should only contain one flower. When knowing a bud or flower exists, but the complete shape of it cannot be identified due to image blurriness or dense flower bud distribution, do not label. When having doubts whether a bud is leaf or flower bud, do not label. The image annotations were prepared using the open-source tool YOLO Label and saved in darknet format by a two-stage process. First, the images were labeled by me and 4 trained research assistants, and then double-checked and relabeled only by me for unlabeled buds, mistaken labels, and labeling style inconsistency. At the time I hired 4 undergraduates, I trained them and spent a few months labeling the images. Every single day, after I woke up until I went to bed, that was all I did. I labeled so many flower buds to a point where I almost started to hallucinate. Once I saw something white, my brain instantly recognized that as flower buds in bloom stage. When I closed my eyes after I went to bed, the flower buds would pop right in front of my eyes. That was some very tedious work. This video here shows the image annotation process using the tool YOLO Label. As you can see, every single recognizable flower bud, in both foreground and background, needed to be annotated. And this image here shows different annotation examples for all 6 growth stages, from tip all the way to petal fall. When I was looking for an object detector and doing the investigation, YOLO v4 was coincidentally just released. Absolutely the state of the art at the time, so I adopted YOLO v4 as the classifier for the apple flower buds. I got into YOLO v4 so early that its GitHub page at the time did not even have a tutorial for setup on Windows, so the code could not be directly run on Windows. I remember I had to search and wait for a few days before a tutorial was released on YouTube. Anyways, its architecture consists of a CSP Darknet 53 backbone with mesh activation, a neck of SPP and PANet with leaky activation, and a YOLO v3 head. To improve class balance, 450 positive samples containing at least one annotation were randomly selected from each of the April and May datasets, which was further randomly split into 70, 20, and 10% for model training, validation, and test. To improve model robustness, an equal amount of negative samples containing no bud or flower, which were mostly from the September dataset, was also added to the training dataset. In total, the training, validation, and test datasets consisted of 5,040, 720, and 360 images, respectively. In a future video, I will discuss this dataset in more detail since I have a paper just for the dataset. The model trainings were executed on a computer with an Intel Core i9 CPU, an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060 GPU, and a 16GB RAM. 3 network sizes, 320, 480, and 640 were tested. Except for learning rate, which was manually tuned between 0.002 and 0.00001 during training to prevent overfitting, all the other hyperparameters were adopted as default. Average precision of a class was calculated based on 11-point interpolated precision recall curves, while the trainings were early stopped when the mean average precision of the validation dataset no longer improved. Model weights with the highest validation MAPs were selected for further investigation. In terms of evaluation, the models were originally evaluated based on the test dataset from 2020 in terms of AP and MAP. The paper did not mention that for the 2021 dataset, we adopted a random sampling-based evaluation method, since the standard AP and MAP-based evaluation requires data annotation, which would be very time-consuming. We first looked at whether at least one flower bud was detected by the best model in the 2021 images. This was because each RGB image was only covering a small area, and therefore even if only one flower bud is detected, that could still be sufficient in guiding frost protection in apple orchards. and then randomly selected 100 images from each of the 4 dates, and randomly selected 1 detected flower bud for manual inspection. In order to generate apple flower bud growth stage maps, the detected apple flower bud locations needed to be calculated. During data collection, every RGB image was geotagged by DJI's A3 Pro flight control system. As shown in the image, the camera was mounted in front of the UAV's GNSS units along the drone's heading direction. Consequently, the GNSS coordinates of each image corresponded to a point located behind the image center. To simplify flower bud location calculation, the image GNSS coordinates were assumed to represent the location of the image bottom center point, considering the small offset between the GNSS units and the RGB camera, as well as the narrow tele-end field of view of the camera. Based on the relative positions of the flower buds in an image, the latitude and longitude of the buds were calculated ignoring Earth's ellipsoidal effects in Python, and here are the formulas. There are a few key variables to the calculation. Phi1 is the latitude of an image bottom center. Lambda1 is the longitude of an image bottom center. Phi2 is the latitude of a bounding box center. Lambda2 is the longitude of a bounding box center. Theta is the bearing from image bottom center to bounding box center, and it is calculated by subtracting the zenith angle, alpha, from the drone heading. Theta ranges from -180 to 180 degrees. If theta is computed to be larger than 180, an additional 360 needs to be subtracted to keep it in the right range. In the study, the drone heading on average was either 151.33 degrees or -28.67 degrees during RGB flight missions depending on the tree row, and alpha ranges from -90 to 90 degrees. Delta is the angular distance between image bottom center and bounding box center. It is calculated as d/r, where d is linear distance between image bottom center and bounding box center, and derived from the pixel numbers in between image bottom center and bounding box center based on an approximated 6.6 times 10 to the minus 8 square meter area for each RGB pixel, considering UAV flight altitude, average tree height, image resolution, and camera field of view. And r is Earth's average radius, which is 6,371 kilometers. Now we're ready to determine the heating needs of apple orchards during frost events. Given the RGB images, we can generate flower bud maps by detecting individual flower buds in the images and calculate their locations, which is equivalent to critical temperature maps based on the detected flower bud growth stages. Here in this sample map, the 3 pixels represent 3 detected apple flower buds with the different levels of critical temperatures, below which they will start sustaining frost damage. Given the thermal images, we can generate temperature maps by stitching the individual thermal images and georeferencing the mosaic using ground control points. And this sample map shows the current temperature of the detected apple flower buds. To calculate the temperature deficits of the flower buds, we can simply subtract the temperature map from the critical temperature map, and that tells us how many degrees the apple flower buds need to be warmed up to not sustain frost damage. In our study, each detected bud was initially mapped as 1 pixel. However, the issue with individual bud temperature deficit map is that it might not be viewing friendly and practical for usage, as heating needs of individual buds are not directly helpful for orchardists to determine heating treatments of a region, especially when the flower bud distribution is dense. To address that, we came up with regional temperature deficit map by prioritizing pixels with higher heating demands, which allowed humans to conveniently see the highest possible heating needs of a region. And from image processing standpoint, this could be easily achieved using the dilation operation, which expands brighter pixels into darker pixels. Now let's get into the study results. For thermal camera calibration, our regression analysis between thermal pixel intensity and ground truth temperature resulted in a strict linear relationship with an R² of 0.99 and an RMSE of 1 degree Celsius, which is similar to what many relevant studies obtained for airborne thermal imagers, such as R² of 0.98 and RMSE of 1.53 degrees Celsius for ICI 8640P series, R² of 0.98 and RMSE of 1.9 degrees Celsius for ICI 9640P series, R² of 0.93 and RMSE of 0.53 degrees Celsius for SenseFly Thermal Map, and R² of 0.96 and 0.937 for FLIR Pro R640. It is important to note that since thermal cameras can be interfered by their surroundings, thermal calibration results should be utilized as mission-specific when significant environmental changes are involved, such as air temperature, humidity, and flight altitude. Generally, thermal cameras can be divided into two categories. The first one is uncooled, which is often equipped with uncooled detectors such as microbolometers. Uncooled cameras have advantages such as lightweights, small sizes, and low prices, which make them an ideal choice for UAV applications. However, they have higher thermal time constants and are also known to suffer from thermal noises induced by changes in camera body temperature. Nevertheless, the capacity and accuracy of uncooled thermal camera are sufficient for our application of orchard temperature monitoring. The second one is cooled. Although being expensive, cooled thermometers usually have greater magnification capacities, better sensitivities, and are able to capture sharp images under short integration time, which make them potentially a superior option when future technology matures. For the thermal mosaic results, here are 3 stitched mosaic examples captured under sunny, partially sunny, and cloudy weather conditions from left to right. Our algorithm was able to stitch 100 images in 30 seconds using the same computer for the yellow classifier training. All apple trees could be clearly distinguished from the background, although certain levels of blurriness and misalignment existed due to the parallax effect and lens distortion. In the study, we only utilized 3 ground control points for demonstration purpose, while higher overall coordinate map accuracy can be achieved with more ground control points, allowing complex image distortion to be corrected with higher order transformations. Sunlight generally helped robust stitching by improving image contrast through shadows and increased temperature difference between plants and soil, and more distinctive image features can be detected and matched. For example, under cloudy condition, on average 976 brisk key points were detected in each image, and 341 were matched in an image pair, while under sunny condition, on average 1,162 brisk key points were detected in each image, and 428 were matched in an image pair. Although sunny weather is a favorable condition, the absence of direct sunlight did not cause difficulty to image stitching in the study, and thermal images taken at nighttime and cloudy daytime were expected to share similar appearances. However, under partially sunny condition, certain regions of a mosaic can appear substantially darker or brighter than the rest. At the same time, rapidly changing weather conditions can potentially bring challenges to the stitching process when temperatures of the same object differ significantly in 2 images. Customization of thermal image stitching as a research topic is much less studied compared to RGB image stitching. In existing literature at the time, studies have attempted to develop a MATLAB toolbox capable of registering thermal images for raw damage recognition using Harris corner detector, develop a framework for stitching video frames from aerial thermal cameras based on SIFT, develop a robust video stitching method for a UAV forest fire monitoring utilizing ECC algorithm, and stitch quantized thermal images using SIFT and contour center key points. In the agriculture domain, many researchers chose commercial software such as Pix4D and Agisoft Metashape for UAV thermal image mosaicing. Our customized algorithm offers the advantage of flexibility in modifying its components. For example, the brisk feature can be easily changed into newer state-of-the-art image feature detectors and descriptors. It is possible to improve the final stitching results by applying techniques such as lens distortion correction, bundle adjustment, and blending. We excluded these steps to keep the algorithm as simple and fast as possible. and not to make unnecessary pixel value manipulations, hence preserving original temperature measurements. After obtaining the thermal mosaics, we can generate viewing-friendly orchard temperature maps based on the calibrated thermal pixel intensity and temperature relationship. This image here shows grayscale and colorized temperature map examples generated from the same thermal mosaic, and the map generation time cost is negligible. In the maps, each pixel represented an area of 3.23 times 10 to the minus 4 square meter approximately, and the maps reflected orchard temperature changes in a 4-minute window due to data collection delay. Regarding the timeliness of our orchard temperature monitoring methodology, there was currently a minimum 5-minute delay from real-time because of image collection and algorithm execution. Subsequently, the two important factors that govern how timely our methodology is include first, stitching time, which was designed in a way that already prioritized computation simplicity, and second, flight time, which certainly has more potential in improving map generation speed and involves a trade-off between resolution and timeliness for orchard temperature monitoring. At higher altitudes, higher UAV speeds can be adopted since larger area will be covered in each image, and motion blur would be less of an issue. At our max UAV speed, which was 15 meters per second, a thermal mission would only take 30 seconds to complete. Much lower temperature map resolutions, such as each thermal pixel covers a whole tree, could still be potentially sufficient, considering trees growing next to each other generally tend to have very similar temperatures. As a result of fewer captured images at high altitudes to cover the same orchard area, the required image stitching time would also be shorter consequently. The performance in terms of APs and MAPs of the best models at 50% intersection over union on the 2020 validation and test datasets for the 3 network sizes is shown in this table. Out of the 3 network sizes, 320 had the lowest MAP, while 480 and 640 had comparable MAPs, indicating image input resolution higher than 480 might not bring additional useful information to the network during training. AP seemed to have a direct correlation with object size. Out of the 6 stages, tip and half-inch grain consistently had the lowest APs, when apple flower buds were the most underdeveloped and had the smallest sizes. Pink had considerably lower APs than tight cluster and bloom, while generally it also had smaller bounding boxes as leaves were excluded in pink but included in tight cluster, and flowers were closed in pink but open in bloom. From bloom to petal fall, APs decreased significantly as the absence of petals led to smaller bounding boxes of petal falls than bloom. Due to the smaller sample size, the test dataset showed substantially larger APs of tip and half-inch grain than the validation dataset, indicating larger sampling biases. For the 2021 results, the best model, which was the size 480 classifier, detected flower buds in all 1,985 images, and it achieved an overall 97.5% accuracy, with 96% for tight cluster, 96% for pink, 99% for bloom, and 99% for petal fall. This result demonstrated the model's robust performance across different years. At the time, deep learning-based apple flower bud growth stage classification has never been studied in existing literature. However, there were 2 studies that have investigated CNN-based apple flower detection. The first one proposed a modified mask scoring RCNN model for classifying 3 types of apple flowers based on their morphological shape, including bud, semi-open, and fully open. Trained on a dataset of 600 images, out of which 400 were manually collected and 200 were generated through image augmentation, the model achieved a 59.4% MAP on a test dataset of 100 images. The second study identified flowers, or rather stamens, of 3 apple varieties with a simplified YOLO-V4 network. With manually collected 1,561 images for training and 669 images for testing, a 97.31% AP was obtained for flower detection. Despite the similarities in nature, We consider our study possess a higher complexity than the two reviewed studies because of two important factors: data temporal coverage and flower distribution density. Because of that, there were a few unique challenges that we had to deal with in the study. While the two reviewed studies collected data only at a narrow time window, which corresponded to the bloom stage in our study, our datasets captured the full range of apple flower bud developmental changes. During image labeling, we had to constantly make judgment calls on which stage a flower bud belonged to. When facing scenarios such as Heaven's Green slightly opened up its leaves, a tight cluster started to show light pink color. A pink transitioned from being pinkish to whitish. A balloon wilted or dropped a few petals, etc. This inevitably created inconsistent bud annotations. Furthermore, we observed that the sample images provided in the two studies had much lower floral density compared to our images. Using the 450 annotated images collected on May 7, 2020, when buds were mostly balloons as examples, the minimum, medium, and maximum number of bounding box per image were 5, 58, and 112, respectively. The dense bud distribution contributed much difficulty to labeling every single flower bud in an image and recognizing all the deformed, occluded flower buds at various depths correctly during image annotation. To facilitate this point, here are 4 sample detection images containing mostly tight cluster, pink, bloom, and petal fall from 2020, where we can see how dense the flower bud distributions were. And here are 4 images from 2021, where the model was still able to successfully detect flower buds from a different year. For model improvements, while building new classifiers with larger image input sizes than 640, or training current classifiers with new images might improve APs for tip, half-inch grain, pink, and petal fall. Re-examining current image labels for annotation accuracy, consistency, and completeness probably has more potential in helping increase model performance, although the process will be very labor-intensive. Considering the average apple flower bud distribution density, suboptimal classifier detection results, such as missing several buds, should have little to no influence on orchard heating requirement determination. For the orchard growth stage maps, here are 3 example maps generated using the April 28th, May 13th, and May 21st dataset from 2020, where dots in different colors represent apple flower buds in different growth stages. We generated the maps using a Python program that applied the size 480 YOLO v4 classifier on the RGB images, which had an average 0.16 second inference time, and saved the detection results to files. The actual mapping of the detected buds to the thermal coordinate map had a negligible time cost. UAV GNSS accuracy is a major factor for the success of apple flower bud mapping. When a bud appears in multiple images taken without the most accurate GNSS signals, it is likely to be mapped multiple times as a bud cluster on the map. This is generally not an issue since little to no temperature variation exists for tree thermal pixels that are close to each other. Therefore, orchard regional heating requirement would not be affected. With the navigation techniques such as real-time kinematic, it is possible to achieve centimeter-level accuracy for UAV positioning. Unexpectedly, the flower bud growth stage maps seemed to have the potential to be an informative tool for agronomists to visualize apple tree developments in high resolution. Here is a close-up view of the apple flower bud growth stage map on May 16, 2020, showing the actual floral density of a tree row section with each detected flower bud mapped as 1 pixel. The map can be utilized for spatial variation visualization based on the same maps, temporal change visualization based on multiple maps, and growth stage timing and duration visualization of different apple varieties, which require shorter data collection time intervals. However, in terms of map limitations in the study, most RGB images only sampled buds growing in the upper and center parts of tree canopies. The camera was not able to include lateral buds in a frame due to its limited field of view, while bottom buds were largely blocked by tree branches, leaves, and upper buds. For the orchard heating requirement maps, Here are 3 examples. These maps were simulated based on the temperature map from June 2nd, 2020, and the flower bud growth stage map from April 28th, 2020, assuming the critical temperature of apple flower buds were 22, 19, and 18 degrees Celsius higher than the actual values respectively. In the maps, pixels with brighter color represent orchard regions with higher heating demands, and sections of tree rows will disappear when it does not have any heating needs. The specific map appearance was achieved based on several image processing techniques, including dilation, Gaussian blurring, and masking. If needed, orchard heating requirement resolution can be increased by dilating pixels with smaller kernels, although practically, lower resolution maps would be more suitable for determining regional heating treatments. Upon further dilations, the tree rows can be merged into an area, and heating requirement levels can be quantized to display discrete heating demand levels of the entire orchard. Now for the LiDAR portion that the paper did not cover. First, we need to create orchard point cloud using raw LiDAR frames. Here are 4 examples created by registering individual LiDAR frames through georeferencing with the UAV's GNSS coordinates. It took about 40 seconds to register all the frames into one point cloud, and each point cloud contained about 1.7 million points. The point colors here represent point near-infrared reflectivity. After obtaining the point clouds, they needed to be converted into 2D height difference maps. The calculation of height difference maps is basically the difference between the maximum height map and the minimum height map, where the pixel values in the maximum height map represent the highest point within the pixel sampling areas, and the pixel values in the minimum height map represent the lowest point within the pixel sampling areas. Instead of directly using the maximum height map to determine safe areas for ground vehicle navigation, the height difference map accounts for terrain elevation variation and can more accurately identify obstacles on uneven ground. To identify open space that are safe for ground vehicle navigation, there were a few steps involved. First, we could use height thresholding to highlight the trees and any other objects with substantial height differences. Then we could do a morphological closing operation to connect the tree pixels into complete tree row regions, followed with a dilation operation to enlarge the tree row regions as a way to buffer some safe distance between the tree rows and the open space for ground vehicle navigation. Finally, if we inversed the obstacle map, we would get the open space map. To generate the final navigation map, all we needed to do was to fuse the heating requirement map with the open space map, as shown in this image. The warm pixels represent orchard heating demand or temperature deficit during frost events. The blue pixels represent open space that are safe for ground heating vehicle navigation, and the black pixels represent either obstacles in orchards such as apple trees or unmapped areas. This study provided a modern orchard frost management framework based on sensing technologies and computer vision algorithms for the purpose of minimizing labor and heating cost and maximizing management efficiency. However, any component of this framework can be modified as needed. For example, the UAV can be replaced with an unmanned ground vehicle. The YOLO V4 detector can be switched to other older but more widely implemented detectors such as faster RCNN, and the image stitching can be completed using readily available commercial software. From the application standpoint, the generation of orchard growth stage maps in our methodology is non-time sensitive. However, they must be obtained before temperature maps. RGB flight missions should be conducted either during daytime or with artificial lighting during nighttime, right before a forecasted frost event. And orchardists can either fly manually to sample buds at pre-planned locations that are representative of the whole orchard, or set up autonomous flight missions to capture bud images as demonstrated in the study, and finally generate a growth stage map from the collected data using a pre-trained classifier. On the other hand, temperature map generation is time-sensitive for timely frost management, but thermal flight missions are not restricted by the time of day, as objects emit relatively strong infrared radiations at all times, so they are completely fine for nighttime. Orchardists can initiate thermal flight missions whenever orchard temperatures need to be gauged. Depending on UAV flight altitudes and speeds, temperature maps can be created either in low resolution but quickly, or in high resolution but with a longer delay. A temperature map by itself already allows orchardists to decide the level of needed heating treatments. However, a heating requirement map takes plant growth stage variation in an orchard in consideration to minimize unnecessary regional heating. The generation of heating requirement maps assumes there is no significant flower bud growth stage changes overnight or within a day, and they can be generated as soon as temperature maps are available. The generation frequency of heating requirement maps essentially depends on plant temperature change rates, and the factors that can influence that include frost protection methods, orchard layout and topography, and weather conditions. The goal would be to generate heating requirement maps at a frequency that ensures timely orchard heating demand assessment as well as observable plant temperature changes. If too slow, frost management could be delayed and therefore lead to frost damages. If too fast, there won't be any plant temperature changes, and therefore the heating requirement map will stay the same. Our proposed methodology could be beneficial to multiple traditional frost protection methods. The first one is obviously orchard heaters, and the other one is irrigation. Unlike orchard thermometers that measure air temperatures, thermal cameras can directly assess how irrigation changes plant temperatures. With the information on a heating requirement map, variable rate irrigation systems can potentially apply larger amounts of water to orchard regions with higher heating demands. On the other hand, large-scale frost management methods such as wind machine might not be the best match to our methodology. A single commercial wind machine often covers an area up to 40,000 to 60,000 square meters. Therefore, it cannot make the most use of a heating requirement map with localized orchard heating demands. Our proposed methodology does not come without limitations. Weather condition is a major factor that influences UAV performance in the air. Using DJI Matrice 600 Pro as an example, it cannot be operated in rain or snow as it is not a waterproof drone, and it has a lower operating temperature limit of -10 degrees Celsius and a maximum wind resistance of 8 meters per second. In addition to affecting drone stability, strong wind can also significantly reduce image quality by causing tree movements. For large orchards, multiple sets of batteries might be needed for prolonged flight missions. As thermal cameras have limited dynamic ranges, they can be potentially blinded by heating sources such as orchard heaters and fail to prevent overheating in the heating region due to glare or scattered infrared radiation. Before trees develop leaves, it can be challenging to map detected flower buds such as tips exactly onto tree branch pixels of a temperature map, since doing so requires navigation systems with very high precision. Luckily, during such growth stages, flower buds also tend to have high cold resistance, and frost damage is generally not an issue. The total cost of equipment used in the study was up to $25,000, which included a UAV, a thermal camera, an RGB camera, an iPad, 2 extra sets of UAV batteries, and a computer. However, this amount could still be substantially cheaper when compared to human labor costs for temperature monitoring of large orchards in the long term. To fully automate orchard frost management, future studies should focus on the development of heating platforms that are capable of site-specific heating and self-navigation, as well as the communication and integration of temperature monitoring and heating units. An example would be a cyber-physical system consisting of UAV-based orchard heating requirement assessment, UGV-based heating, and station-based vehicle communication, UAV data processing, and heating treatment determination. The UAV can maintain a predefined surge pattern to monitor orchard temperatures, while the UGV will be dispatched to apply heating treatments as soon as orchard temperatures fall below the critical levels. The base station can first generate an orchard heating requirement map containing both temperature and location information using our proposed methodology, and then determine the order of heating locations and the duration of heating treatments for the UGV. While our proposed methodology can generate near real-time heating requirement maps, true real-time heating demand determination is possible by flying thermal and RGB cameras simultaneously, applying flower bud detector on RGB camera, and registering thermal and RGB video frames, although much hardware integration and software development would be required to achieve robust results. In conclusion, the concept of UAV-based thermal camera for temperature monitoring and RGB camera for plant growth stage spatial variability characterization in apple orchards was demonstrated. The thermal image stitching algorithm produced georeferenced temperature maps with high resolutions sufficient for individual flower bud mapping, whose generation time can be improved by sacrificing thermal mosaic resolutions for more timely orchard temperature assessments. The fully functioning YOLO V4 apple flower bud growth stage classifier achieved satisfactory performance considering the difficulty of the RGB datasets. Training the classifier with new images or larger image input sizes might improve APs of certain growth stages, while refining existing image labels is more likely to fundamentally enhance the model sophistication. Orchard heating demand variations were observed in the simulated heating requirement maps, which proved uniform heating treatments for frost protection in orchards might be wasteful. We consider our proposed methodology of orchard heating requirement determination is feasible, and the study can serve as a stepping stone for future research on fully autonomous, site-specific orchard frost management systems. Lastly, I would like to add an extra slide that I used during the presentation for my department seminar. If this represents where I started before my PhD, and this represents where I finished after my PhD, then this would be what I presented in this video, while in reality, this is what I've been through. So if you are watching this video and happen to be a grad student doing research, buckle up and good luck. As the first paper that I published during my PhD, this paper opened up my eyes to UAV, deep learning, and in a sense robotics as well because of the cyber-physical system concept in the project proposal. To this day, I still think the proposal was great. So did everyone on the team. But something else everyone also agreed on was that we did not get to see the full potential of this project at all. Grad students suddenly dropped out without a notice. My advisor relocating to a different university near the end of my PhD. Therefore, the change of the principal investigator, COVID, all those unpredictable factors brought huge challenges to the project. That also taught me that the ideation and execution of a project are completely two things. We literally had a travel trailer parked in the orchard and planned to use that to do some overnight frost research. Unfortunately, the big in-field collaboration with all the professors and students just never happened. And the proposed real-time cyber-physical system with the UAV flying in the air and the UGV heating on the ground simultaneously never get to see the light of day. Imagine how awesome that would be. The proposal also mentioned using microwave frequency energy waves as a novel way to heat up the flower buds, a very cool idea, which was not explored either. Because of the complete white space and the precise frost management space, at one point I actually grouped the other two grad students on the team to discuss the feasibility to form a company to commercialize the whole idea. But the more we thought about it, the more we realized that it is crazy hard to scale up the idea and build a sustainable business model, especially for large-scale orchards. How can we possibly heat up that large of an area? How much equipment we would need? How do we charge our customers? And our brainstorming sessions just gradually turned into dead silence. After all, we're fighting Mother Nature. Years ago, I had the chance to be a professor at Penn State, but I chose not to. If I ever go back to university, I will seriously consider this as my first research topic and maybe even dedicate my whole life to find a truly feasible and scalable way to help growers battle frost and then commercialize it. Because again, I believe there is just too much unrealized potential in this project, and there is no better person in the whole world other than me to lead this research. I think I will first travel to all the orchards all over the states that are willing to collaborate with me and interview all the growers to have an updated survey on the level of frost damage they sustain every year and exactly how they deal with frost and what challenges they're facing, and then modify my research approach based on their actual needs. More than likely, the RGB camera-based growth stage identification is going to be an overkill, because the critical temperatures of different bud growth stages really do not vary that much. But UAV-based thermal camera for temperature monitoring for sure is convenient and much more spatially precise than traditional orchard thermometers. Whether the temperature measurements are accurate or not would be a different topic, which I will cover in a different video. Thank you for watching the video up to this point. I know it is very long, and I think I have just accidentally summarized pretty much my whole PhD in this video. By the way, a little backstory for you. I was using a plugin called Edison in FL Studio to record my voiceover, which for whatever reason has a default recording duration limit of 30 minutes, and I did not know that. I spent many hours recording but ended up with only 30 minutes of audio, so I pretty much had to record everything twice for the whole video. If you hear a sudden tone, pitch, or speed change of my voice, that means I was rage recording the second time. I'll see you in my next paper.